So good morning all, and today we are discussing an important concept in C++ called constructor and destructor. So what is constructor and what is destructor, and what is the usage and applications that is added into the C++ program, and with its syntax and example programs and types of constructors and the example programs on types of constructors. In detail we are going to be discussing it today, right? So firstly, before going with an actual concept, what exactly constructor and working principle, syntax and example program, just I'll be taking one simple example. And with that example, so in C++, as we know, the syntax representation is always starts with a preprocessor directive, that is IO stream, then followed by using namespace std just to avoid naming collision. And just I am taking a class called it as sample, and within that class I am declaring two members, right? So which is of integer data type, and it is initialized with the two different values, that is a equal to 1 and b is equal to 2. So basically, if I enter the same code with any type of IDEs or any type of softwares, and the predicted output is always going to be the compiler error. What is the reason is nothing but when you are declaring the members without any specifications or any specifier by default, and it acts as a private data members, right? Means in simple term, if user is specified an access specifier, then either private, public and protected, and exactly that particular access specifier will be accessed for particular members, right? But according to this program, we are not specified an access specifier, right? Hence by default the compiler will treat as a private access specifier, right? So the integer values of both a and b is a private data member. So in simple term, C++ doesn't allow the initialization of a data member of class which is of private data members. Hence the compiler results allocated as compiler error. The reason is nothing but data members of a class are not initialized with specific values for a private data member. For public you can initialize, because public data members can be accessible throughout the program, but private data members can be accessible within the class with the same member function. That's why data members of the class are initialized through member function of same class. So through that we can achieve data hiding concept. So by declaring the private access specifier, we can achieve data hiding, or we can call it as data security, right? So that is a simple example where exactly if I declare a private data member or initialized with private data member, then the compiler will result in compiler error, right? Next we move on to same program with some extension like modification, right? So same syntax we are going to be following in C++ syntax, and but here I have taken the class name as a test, and within that class data member can be incorporated as well as member function can also be incorporated, right? So data member is initialized with the value a is equal to 10, and along with it I'm declaring a method called it as a read, which is of data type void, right? And within that I am taking output method cout, and I'm just displaying the value of a, what exactly it is stored. As usual, the execution begins with the main method. Here I'm creating an object. Basically objects are going to be created for a class with the syntax class name followed by object name, right? Test specifies the class name and t specifies an object name. So if you want to access a method that is defined in a class, we are having a syntax called it as object dot method name. Hence we are representing in a main method t dot read, right? So method is accessed with the help of an object by using an operator called dot operator, right? Again, if we compile with any type of ID or any compiler tool, it specifies an output as an error. What is the reason is nothing but since the value that we are going to be initialized a class of value a is equal to 10, it is available for a particular class, but the thing is nothing but it is declared as a private, right? But void read is a method. Within that context, it is not possible for a read method to access the private method. Even the void read is not specified it as a particular access specifier. Even though if you're not specified it also, some compilers it's not allowed to access the private data member. So void read method doesn't have a rights to access the private data member. Again, it shows a compiler error. Next we verify another program, but before going for an actual example, just I'll give it some text information. So whenever you're taking the private members are not initialized directly. That's the first tool. Basically based on two examples what you have taken, so private members cannot be initialized directly. Nextly, private members are accessible within a function. Private members are accessible within a function and they are not allowed to access outside the class or outside the function. So through that we can verify data ID and we can also provide security to the data, that is about secure of data, right? But the public members can be accessed from anywhere in the program. So based on this concept, just we are going for simple example program. So by taking with a class name, call it as sample, and again you are declaring the two data member, and again you are declaring that object s is equal to 2 of 5, means we are taking that value, we are directly taking that value for the two data members. Again the compiler shows an syntax or logical error, right? So what is the drawback with this program is that but user cannot allocate directly to the private data members, user cannot access the directly with the private data members, right? So that's the one distinctions we can identify with this program. So this is a basic error that we are going to be facing it within all different types of application programs, where exactly you're creating within class and followed by some objects and everything, right? Next we are move on to another program. So whenever the data members are not initialized directly, then what is an exact value? For example, if you're declaring the two data members and if data members are not initialized, and even if you're trying to printing some value, if that is the case, that values are going to be printed by the compiler is a garbage value. Just consider one simple example. So where we are going to be taking with the two data members a and b, and we are trying to displaying that values, we are trying to going to be displaying that particular value, and even we are not declaring any object, and again we are not taking any type of access method or any member function, but we are simply trying to printing some particular value. If that is the case, always that compiler is going to be displays and garbage value, means even if you're not initialized any value, the system is allocate some predefined values, right? Integer it occupies 0, for floating point it occupies 0 0, for character it occupies null value, for double it occupies 0.00 followed by 4 zeros, right? So this is again another simplified example where exactly if then nothing is declared and initialized, then how default or garbage value is going to be assigned by your compiler, right? Next again we move on to another simple program of simplified C++ syntax, where you have taken a class, called it as a test, and you have declared a method, called it as a public, and we declared method called as a read, which is of private access specifier, and we declared two members a and b, which is of public data members, right? Next we are creating an object called a t, and when you are accessing an object called with the help of read method, we are using a syntax t.read. So once if you simply enter the same program with any type of IDE, the predicted output is always going to be 0. Reason is nothing but since we are not initialized any value, and since we are not assigned any value, right? That is the reason the value is going to be occupied it as 0, means the execution is begins with the main method. Once it starts with execution in a main method, first it identifies a test is already declared as a class, and again it consists of a data member called a and b and method called it as read method. And if you want to access that member function or a method defined in a class test, we are using a syntax t dot method name, and the t is an object of the class t, and read is a method that is already defined with the same class test, and output, it since it does not contain any value, output is going to be 0. In case same example, slight modification, if I declare class called cs, and if I declare two data member called it as a and b and the method called it as read, and but you are assigning a value for that particular members, so a is equal to 5 and b is equal to 20, then you are trying to printing with an output statement cout a as well as b. And within a main method we are creating an object called c. Within a main method we are creating an object called c for a given class cs, right? If you want to access a read method defined for cs class, the syntax is simple, c dot read method. So if that is the case, if I take the program, what will happen? C dot read calls a read member function, then data members are initialized. If in case if without calling the member function, then the data members are not initialized. For example, in the main method, you have taken a syntax called it as c.read. Once if we call c.read method, then control directly goes to read method, then the values are initialized for the two data members a and b. In case if you're not calling the member function, at any cost, the value is not going to be initialized for the data members a and b. But how to initialize the data members automatically? That's a task. Means without calling, is there any option? Without calling, is there any alternative? Without calling, it is possible to initialize the data member for a particular class, right? So by this program, what is we can identify is by using a read method, we are accessing the data members, means we are initializing the data members. But the question is, the task is without initializing the data members, how without accessing particular method, how we can initialize the data members automatically, right? So that's a class, that's a task is nothing but how we can assign the values for a data members without initializing the class, or without accessing the class, or without using the object. So if that is the case, we are using a concept called it as constructor, means how we can initialize the data members automatically without accessing particular method, without accessing the class, without accessing an object. If that is the case, we are using a special member called it as construction. So that constructor is nothing but a member function. So what exactly constructor, where we are using constructor, what is its role, what is its characteristic, what is its advantages, right? First we go for a definition. So constructor is a function, constructor is also a function, but we are considering it's a special member function where it is used to initialize an object itself, right? So what exactly constructor, constructor is also a function, but it is a special member function and it is used to initialize an object itself, that is automatic initialization of objects, very important, right? Next, when the objects are initialized, is it required to call the method? That's the question. It is nowhere it's required. Once if you're creating an object, automatically the data members are going to be initialized. When objects are invoked, objects are created, automatically the data members are going to be initialized, automatically the data members are going to be accessed, right? So if user want to initialize the data members without using member function, and also the private members are initialized through member function by using a concept called constructors, very important. The purpose is, if user want to initialize the data members without using member function, then constructor is required. And if the private data members are initialized through member function by using a concept called constructor, that is the main purpose of your constructor, right? Next, if constructors are invoked automatically when the object of class is created, the question is how the constructors are created. So it is an automatically the value is going to be assigned. Once objects are created or invoked, the constructor will be called automatically, the constructor gets called automatically. So that is very important characteristic feature of your constructor. Nextly, whenever you are using a constructor concept, constructor is going to initialize the object itself, that is also considered as automatical initialization. Automatic initializations can be done by constructor by initializing the object itself, that is very important point. Nextly, constructors are used then the data members are invoked and they are initialized when the objects of the class is going to be created. Means constructors are mainly used then the data members of particular class is initialized and objects is going to be created. That's a very basic feature of your constructor. Next we move on to what is the rules and benefits of a constructor. So first rule is, when you are accessing the constructor, very important factor is constructor is used when the data members are automatically initialized, that is object of the class is created. And nextly, once objects are created, it automatically constructor is going to invoke and data members are initialized. Very important tool is nothing but, if I created any object, consider a class called CS and you have created an object called C. Once if you created an object C, automatically the constructor is invoked and again the data members are going to be initialized. So without accessing the particular method, the constructor by default it will take the data and it is going to be updates its particular value. And nextly, when if I consider the same program as an example, c.read it going to be calls the read member function, then the data members are going to be initialized. In case if without calling the member function, then data members are not initialized. But to initialize the data members automatically without calling the member function, then we are using the concept called constructor. Means by taking the previous example, we are going to be accessing the particular data members, that is through help of a constructor concept. Nextly, constructors are mainly used for eliminated default values. So very important. So whenever you are creating any applications or any programs, basically you are declaring some value and that values is going to be modified for certain time. The value is going to be modified in certain extent of some other time. So that is nothing but, if you want to eliminate, if you want to replace the default value by an user defined value, then constructor plays an important role. So that is always going to be plays an important tool to eliminate the default values into user defined values. When your user create an object of any class, then it allocates a memory for all the data members and initialize the default values. To eliminate the default value, then constructor is must. That is very important. Next, what are the characteristic or features that is going to be available for a constructor? So very important, note is that what is the features we have to follow, what are the characteristic features that is going to be added to your constructor. So very importantly, whenever you're creating a constructor, very prime factor or very technical point is nothing but the constructor name should be same as that of the class name. Means if user is creating a class name, call it as CS, then if you're creating the member function or a method called as CS, then that is considered as a constructor. Means in simple term, the constructor name should always remain same as that of the class name. So where exactly it is going to be belongs, or where exactly it is going to be created. And along with it, the constructor should be declared in the public access specifier. Constructor is always declared in a public access specifier. So whenever the constructor is there, it should be same name as that of class, and again constructor should be declared in a public access specifier. And nextly, constructors are invoked automatically when an object of classes are going to be created. So it is same as your basic definition, how the constructors are invoked automatically, and corresponding objects how it is going to be created. Nextly, in constructor can never return any value. So basically member function, it will be written some defined values. For example, integer member function will be there, or floating point member functions will be there, or double member functions will be there, and sometimes even void is also return type. It doesn't writing any value. Same thing, since constructor is a special member function, but it doesn't return any value. So therefore, unlike a normal function, constructor doesn't have any return value, including void also it doesn't return. That is a very important feature of your constructor. And constructor cannot be inherited and virtual. Means constructor cannot be inherited, we cannot reuse it. Constructor cannot be reused. So inheritance main purpose is that reusability, where that one class can be accessed in another class. But constructor is not like that. Constructor is a special member functions, cannot be inherited. We cannot call constructor as many number of times as we are doing it for normal member function. Very important point. Constructor cannot be inherited and constructor cannot be called more than once. Right, very important one. Later we'll discuss same thing in a technical example. Right, as of now constructor cannot be inherited and virtual. So constructor cannot call it as an inheritance concept, and constructor cannot call it as an virtual function. Nextly, constructor cannot be declared as a static keyword, volatile, or const keyword. So user cannot declare the constructors as a static, volatile, as well as const keyword. So user compulsorily should avoid with the implementation of declaring a static, volatile, as well as const. So that is important point. And nextly, constructor can also be overloaded. Constructor can also be overloaded. That is nothing but overloading constructor. Constructor overloading. Same as a method overloading. Same class name will be there, and different return type, different logic, and different number of parameters. That is nothing but constructor overloading. So constructor supports overloading. Constructor permits overloading. That is nothing but overloading constructor, constructor overloading. And nextly, like other C++ function, constructor can also have default arguments. Similar to normal member function, the constructors is going to be take some arguments. So constructors may or may not have arguments, but in simple term, constructor can also have default arguments. It can contain some arguments or parameters or variables. Next, constructor can be used explicitly to create an object of its class type. So how we can declare a variable or to allocate some memory to hold some value. Similarly, constructors are explicitly used to create a new object for its class type using a syntax class name followed by expression list. So objects can be created by using the constructor. Since constructor name is same as a class name, it is allowed to create an object explicitly by using constructor also. Other than class, we can also create explicitly by using constructor name. And again, it's not possible to take or find the address of constructor. Very important. So it is not easy to identify address of the constructor. Since constructor is a special member function, we cannot take an address of constructor. So it is very difficult and it is hard to find address of the constructor. And next point, the constructor makes implicit calls to new and delete operators. So whenever you are using the constructors, the compiler implicitly it processes with two different keyword dynamic memory allocation concepts, new as well as delete operators. So there is an implicit usage whenever you are using with a constructor concept. Nextly, in general, normal member functions are called any number of times. As I told in the previously, constructors cannot be used with an inherited concept, and constructor cannot be used with a virtual concept. So in general, normal member functions can be called any number of times, but the constructors can call only once, and it is associated with an object name. Since the constructors cannot be processed as an inheritance concept and cannot be processed with an virtual functions, and constructors is always associated with an object name. It cannot be called as many number of times as verified in terms of normal member function, right? So constructor can be called only once and it cannot be called more than once, right? Very important one. Then the normal member function are called or accessed using an object with dot operator, but constructor member function are no need to call. Very important is nothing but if you want to access a normal method. So in the previous examples, I used a method called it as a read and test. If you want to access a read method as a normal member function, then I need to create an object, then dot operator, then the method name. So to access that method, I need to use an object name dot method name. But when you're using a constructor, no need to call or no need to invoke with an object name. They're executed automatically. The compiler itself executes automatically. Later we're going to be verified in terms of programming example. But as of now, the constructor cannot be called or invoked with the help of an object name, right? Next, what are the advantages? By using a constructor, what is an advantage or uses to C++ program? Firstly, the constructors are used to initialize object itself. If you want to initialize your object automatically, then constructor is required. Nextly, when constructor is used to provide the resources for an object members. What is resources? It is just an allocating in memory. So constructor constructs a memory. Constructor is going to be adds a memory. So that's why constructor will provide the resources, or we can call it as a memory for the object members. And again, no need to call the constructor member function as we seen with the previous characteristic. So constructor cannot be called because it is going to be automatically invoked other than the normal member functions. That is one of the advantage of your constructor. And constructors are participated in overloading within a class, hence it is referred as a constructor overloading. The constructor will support overloading, but it doesn't support inheritance and virtual function. Very important. Nextly, we'll look at with one simple example how to implement a constructor program. A simple example. So by taking the reference of your characteristics, rules and benefits and advantage, the constructor name should be same as class name, and constructors can be used for implementing overloading, but constructor cannot use to implement over inheritance virtual function, and constructor doesn't write any return type, and constructor may have some argument, may not have the argument. So just we'll take one simple example. So here we are declaring the header file iostream and using namespace std. Then we are declaring a class, called it as a test, and within that we are declaring one member, called it as a, and the method called it as test. And within the method we are initializing the value of a is 20, and then we are printing with some output statement cout followed by a. Next, we are taking a main method, right? So previous example, since we are not declared as a constructor, means assume with the method name here test, and according to characteristic, feature and rules, test doesn't return any value, and test is same as a class name. So hence I can consider this as a constructor, right? But test followed by t, what it specifies? Test is a name of class and t is an object that is declared for a class called it as test. But once if you write the same program in any compiler, irrespective of the compiler, irrespective of any interface, you are going to be getting an output as 20. But some you will be having a doubt that some students or some users will be having a doubt that, so without accessing test method, how it is possible, how we can print the value of 20? Very simple, as I told it in the characteristics and along with the rules and advantages section. So constructors cannot be invoked same as your normal member function, right? Once objects are created, constructors are invoked automatically. Through that, it assigns or initialize the data members, then it will be display the particular output. So this example clears what exactly constructor, its feature, its rules, its benefit, and overall working principle of your constructor. Very important. But the question is, assume that in the class name and the method name, if both are same, then I can call it as constructor. But if class name is different and method name is different, then the constructor is nowhere is available. But even though if the class name is different, method name is different, the compiler is going to be creates a default constructor for the class name, that is a test. So the default constructor will be created if the method name and class name is different, but the default constructor doesn't contain any code. Very important. So assume instead of test, if I taken cs, then cs will be the method, test will be the class. But if I compiled it, test related default constructor will be created, but that doesn't contain any code. That is called as default constructor. But luckily in this example we have taken same name, class name and method name, hence I will be calling this is an constructor. And that once the constructor with an object is created, it is not necessary to call the method name or special member function called constructor. The predicted output is going to be 20. Next we move on to important note. Whenever the constructors are used or constructors are implemented in any C++ program, and how it is going to be called, how it is going to be invoked. So constructors are called in descending order, very important. So assume you are having the 3 to 4 types of constructors, that is a constructor overloading. So same class name will be there, method name will be there, different arguments, different type of logics will be there. So if that is the case, how that constructors are going to be called? If more than 3 constructors are there, in which order the constructors are going to be invoked? So very importantly, and very important question for your placement also, how the constructors are called. And again, it is going to be the same for your C++, Java, or any type of object oriented programming application. So whenever you are using the constructors concept, constructors are always called it in descending order, means starting from the root class and stepping down to your tree to reach the last leaf object that you need to initiate, right? So there exactly you are going to be initiating it. So very importantly, the constructors are going to be called in descending order. So if 4 constructors are there, firstly it is going to be execute your last constructor, then again it is going to be in a reverse order, it is going to be reached to your root class of your constructor, very important. And nextly, destructors are called in ascending order. So next we'll discuss what is a destructor, but as of now it is an important note. Constructors will be in descending order, but destructors is called it in ascending order. And destructors, as of now, it is just used to deallocate, or it is going to be destruct, or it is going to be delete the memory that is allocated by your constructor. So memory allocated for your object, memory is allocated for the object for a data member that is defined for a particular class. If you want to delete that memory, if you want to release or free up the memory, so destructors are going to be used. Means in simple term, destructors is going to be deletes a memory for a particular data that is going to be allocated for the constructors. That is another important one. And whenever you're using in a reverse order of construction, first constructed, lastly destructed. In simple scenario, we can call reverse order process. What is reverse order process? Firstly, constructor is going to be there, then reverse order destructions will be there. So reverse order of construction is represented as constructed, and lastly it will be considered as an destructors. So if I consider one simple example, how that constructors and destructors is applicable for any object-oriented program. So B's destructor will be executed, then later that is destructors connected to your particular class is going to be finalized. So one simple snippet of the user code is going to be available. Just consider one example. So where we are creating a method called as user code, and again we are creating CSE as a class, and again we are created with an object called A and another object called B. So if you created an object A and B, user can have only one destructor for a class. Very important note, whenever you are creating a constructor supports overloading concept, but destructor doesn't support overloading, and destructors is going to be called only for one class, and hence the destructors cannot be overloaded. Very important. Next we move on to what is destructor. And as I told, destructor is going to be used for delete or free up the memory space that is allocated by your constructor. So to delete particular memory occupied by the constructor, we are using a concept called destructor. And destructor is also a special member function. Destructor is also a special member function, right? So constructor is used to construct an object's data, where every object is having the data member, and data member is nothing but a variable, but are stored it in stack or heap memory based on the declaration type. So whenever you're creating an object, that every object is having a data member, and the data member is nothing but a variable, and that are always stored in a particular region of your memory. Either you can call it as a stack region, either you can call it as a heap region, right? And whenever if object is created, whenever any object is created, it occupies some memory, it occupies some storage area, that is constructor is executed, right? And when the object is defined, memory is allocated for the particular object, right? And if you want to deallocate, to release or deallocate the memory created by the constructor, we are using a special member function called it as destructor. So again, it's an exact working principle of your construction. Destructor is going to be works. Constructor allocates a memory for object, destructor deallocates a memory from the object. So that is very important, right? And destructor automatically releases a memory occupied by the constructor once the execution is completed. Once the overall working of your program is completed, nowhere it is going to be useful further in a program, then destructor automatically deletes the memory occupied by the constructor. So very important. So what is the syntax? So same syntax of the class name should be same as your method name, that is a constructor. In destructor also we are representing class name, but the change is nothing but we are using a title or a negation symbol before the class name. And again, the constructor doesn't occupy a return type. Same thing, Destructor is also doesn't occupy any return time. And when the destructor gets called automatically, when the program completes its execution, when the scope containing the local variable ends, and if you call the delete operator. When user call the delete operator, then destructor is going to be called automatically, that it deallocates the memory that is allocated for the constructor. So again, we will going to be looking with what are the rules that is available for the destructor, same as your constructor. And name of the destructor must begin with the title character, and again it should be same as your class name, same as the constructor rule. And destructor, again, it doesn't have any return type, just like a constructor. Even void is also doesn't going to be supports, right? And when user doesn't specify any destructor in a class, compiler generates a default constructor. Sorry, when user doesn't specify any destructor in a class, compiler generates a default destructor and inserts into your code. Means once the completion of your execution is ended, then the compiler is going to be allocates a default destructor to delete some memory within a code. Next, destructor, again, it doesn't have any parameters. So, but constructor may or may not have an arguments or a parameter, but destructor never have any parameter. And the class destructor is automatically invoked when the instance of the class goes out of the scope. So, in general, if I declare any member within a particular class, it is scope is reserved for the particular class. If I declare the member within a private, it is scope is reserved to the private. Same thing, when the destructor is automatically invoked, the instance of the class goes out of the scope. So once the scope is out, for example, if I am accessing particular data member A within one class, its scope is going to be deleted automatically by the destructor. If I am declared another member called B, the scope is going to be deleted once it controls comes out of the class. That is nothing but the instance of the class goes out of the scope. Automatically the memory is going to be deleted. Very important, right? Next, the there cannot more than one destructor in a class. That is, class cannot have more than one destructor. Means destructor we cannot take it more than once. Reason is nothing but whenever you're taking a destructor, the main role is nothing but it is going to be deallocating the memory space. So by default, the compiler is going to be deletes a memory if user is not explicitly specified. And in general, the constructor doesn't have more than one destructor. That the constructor can have more than one constructor, that is a constructor overloading, but destructor doesn't have more than one destructor. Unlike constructor that can have a parameter, destructor doesn't have a parameter, as we discussed in the fourth point. And again, very importantly, the constructors should be declared in a public section. Similar to array, the destructors also declared in a public section, and destructor never participate in overloading. So hence it is always called only once, but constructors will participate in overloading, right? Next, we look on to memory region for constructor and destructor. How the memory is going to be allocated for a constructor along with the destructor, right? So again, we have taken one simple class, called it as CS, and we have declared two data members A and B, and the constructor name called it as CS. Again, it is same. It doesn't have return type. Again, it doesn't contain any argument. Within that, it is having the two data members, A is equal to 5 and B is equal to 7. And in general, so memory is allocated for the class. So class will contain a method called it as CS. And as we know, integer in a 60-byte machine, 2 byte it occupy. Since two data member, 2 into 2, 4 byte of memory is going to be created. And corresponding destructor syntax, again it is same as a class name, but it is started with title or negation symbol, and just we have taken one block of code, that's a two output statement, value of A and value of B, directly it is going to be printed, right? So if I take the previous program as an example, how the memory region is going to be allocated. As we all know, in general, whenever you are creating any data, whenever you are creating any block of code, whenever you are creating a macro definition, whenever you are creating submodules program, each and everything will be stored in a segments of your memory within a computer. So it depends on the architecture and organization of computer, and basically the memories for a program is categorized into two types. And normal variable stack, it will be stored, object is going to be stored in heap region, and depends on the scope or lifetime of the variable, the blocks of the region memory is going to be allocated for the particular data member. So similar to that, the two parts of memory in which an object can be stored, firstly stack region and nextly heap region. What exactly stack region? So memory from the stack is used for all the data members which are declared inside the blocks or functions. What are the members that you declared inside the blocks or a function or a class? Everything stored it in a stack memory. But if the memory space is unused and is used to dynamically allocating the memory at runtime, then that type of memory is considered as a heap. Some objects, either it will be stored in stack or it will be stored in heap region. Once object is created, then constructor is invoked and its data is going to be initialize. So very importantly, here you are taking one simple example, sample s. For the same program, by taking the same program where we are taking a CS as a class name, and with the help of same syntax we are taken sample s, so where object is going to be created and 4 bytes of memory is reserved in the stack memory region. Since we are declared two data members, assume we are declared two data members, hence 2 into 2, that is 4, 2 plus 2, that 4 bytes of memory is reserved for the data members in a stack region, and destructor is executed when the object is deleted with its value. So once execution is completed, then destructor automatically deletes the memory and it will give into some other process. Nextly, what are the different types of constructor? So default constructor will be there, that is a without code as I discussed, and zero constructor, some test book is going to be verified in 2 types, 3 types, 4 types, it will depends on the authors, but again we will be considering the default constructor without code. Implicitly the compiler will create a constructor if user is not specifying, and normal constructor we can call it a zero constructor. Constructor will be there but without any parameter, hence it is a zero constructor. Parameter is constructor, as name suggesting the constructor is there explicitly as well as implicitly, but parameters are specified in a program. And lastly, copy constructor, right? So it depends on the authors and the test book and depends on the programmer. Constructors generally 3 categories will be there, but here we are taken into 4 categories. Default constructor is implicit constructor created by the compiler if user is not created the constructor in a given program. Zero constructor or a normal constructor where the constructors will be there but it doesn't contain any arguments. Parameterized constructor means constructors will be there but allowed with some parameters. And lastly, copy constructor. Now we'll discuss each constructors separately. So this example will give a clear example of default constructor, right? So you have taken test as a class name but method name is different. So but even though if you are not taken constructor, the C++ compiler it will create a constructor, default constructor called it as test, that is same as your class name but it doesn't contain any code, right? So default constructor is invoked by the compiler implicitly, defaultly, but it doesn't contain any code. And finally output will be printed as C++ program. So this is a simple example for your default constructor. And nextly, parameterized constructor. What is parameterized constructor? So parameterized constructor, as I told, the constructor it supports a parameter which accepts a parameter, then it is a parameterized constructor. And as we know, constructor means same name as that of class. Here we have taken the class name, called it as test, and again the test constructor or a method it accepts a parameter, one parameter called it as x, hence it is called as a parameter constructor. So as usual, the execution of the C++ program begins with the main method. Here we are creating an object called t, and t is going to be taking in one parameter called it as a 50. Once execution begins, the main method, the object is created called it as a t with one parameter of 50, that is directly passed to a particular constructor that is defined within a class, that is going to be allocated by data member x, and that x value is allocated to a variable that is nothing but a, and finally the value of v is going to be printed as 50. For the same example, if I not passed a value 50, then it is a constructor. So same example, if I assigned a value within a method, instead of a is equal to x, if I pass a is equal to 20, then it is a default normal constructor, zero constructor, right? So zero constructor means constructor will be there without parameter. Parameterized constructor means constructor will be there with parameter. Parameter can be 1 to n numbers. It depends on the functionality or it depends on the logic of the program. Nextly, we move on to copy constructor. What is copy constructor? As name is suggesting, copying the value, copying the data, copying the information from one object into another object. So that is nothing but copy constructor. Means in C++ provides a special type of constructor to copy the value of one object data member into another object data member, that is called it as copy constructor. And copy constructor, it accepts address of a particular object. It will take address of particular object of a given class and it copies its member to another class object member. Thereby we can achieve copy constructor, right? So simple syntax is given, class name, then const is a keyword, class name followed by address of that particular object that you are going to be taking and from where to where you are going to be copying it. So how we can duplicate the values from one object into another object. So copying one data into another, same as your string copy or adding some one copy file into another copy of the file. So based on that, a copy constructor is going to be implementing. And here you are having the syntax with an example. So if I'm having a CALC as a constructor, then C1 and followed by C2, right? What exactly C2 and C1? So in simple term, C1 is existing object on that existing object data member value is copied into new object called it as C2, or CALC C2 equal to C1. Existing C1 object data value is passed to a new C2 value data. That is explicit syntax. We are going to be using it in copy constructor. Just we verified with an implicit and explicit how we can assign a value. Example program. Just verified with a simple student example. Here we have taken the student as a class name is student 6, and we have declared a data member ID, and string SN is a class, it is not a data type, and string will contain an object name. Then followed by we have taken parameterized constructor which is same name as that of class, and that parameter it accepts two data int I and string n. Then again we are having another parameterized constructor, but this is a copy constructor, very important. So there we are not taking any data member, instead we are taking class name itself as a parameter. If you are taking complete class with its data member and object, then that is called it as a copy constructor, or we can copy, right? As usual, the execution begins with the main method. So here we are creating with the main method two objects, S1 as well as S2, and new is a keyword. In that example, we have taken the syntax new is a keyword which is used to create an object for a given class. And in student 6, S1 equal to new student 6 1 comma m. So that syntax specifies, that particular syntax implicitly specifies that we are creating an object called S1 for the class called student 6 by using a keyword called new, right? And new is a keyword come operator which is used to create an object for given class. Since the student 6 is a class that accepts two parameters, one which is of integer data type and another is of a string data type, so it is going to be allocating the value for two objects S1, but same S1 value we are copying into S2 object. Very importantly, in the second syntax, we are creating another constructor. For a particular constructor, we are creating an object called it as S2. So S2 is an object we are creating for a class student 6, but S2 we are copying the value of a S1 object and directly we are copying into S2. So in display function, we have taken S1.display and S2.display. What value we are assigned it for S1 object of student 6 class, same value is going to be copied to S2 object of student 6 class. Means in simple term, same data is going to be accessed in a copy constructor. So in very simple example, how that object of one class it's going to be passed. Object of one class is nothing but its data member value. Its data members here is ID of student and name of your student. Next again we move on to another simple example, another way of how the copy constructor can be implemented. User can copy its value one object into another by assigning the object value, that is nothing but direct initialization, or we can call it direct initialization with assignment statement, right? So S1 of ID whatever will be there, that will be directly allocated to S2 of ID, and again S1.display it will take the display method of S1 object, S2.display it will take display method for S2 object. Again it is same as the previous program, but syntax wise it is different. So there you are taking direct initialization, but there you are taken with an assigning with object. Through object we are going to be assigning it, right? Next, what is constructor overloading? So constructor supports overloading, but destructor doesn't support overloading. It's very simple. Overloading is nothing but performing more than one task, right, with the same class name. So constructor overloading is a mechanism or a process where one class followed by n number of constructor method, but it will perform different logic. It contain different arguments, but it doesn't contain any return type. So very important, right? In C++, user can have more than one constructor in a class with the same name, as long as each has a different list of arguments, different return type and different logic. But thing is that there is a no return type, but according to the syntax, the return type is not going to be allowed in a constructor, but logic wise it will be different. So this concept is nothing but constructor overloading, and again it is similar to function overloading, or we can call it as in Java method overloading, right? So class name will be same, but the method will be different and number of arguments will be different. So take one simple example to illustrate your constructor overloading, where you are creating a class called it as C, and again we have created normal constructor without any parameter, that is a just constructor, and again we are creating a constructor with two parameters, and again we have taken a method called it as display. In main method we are creating an object O, and that is O followed without any argument, and O2 that accepts a two argument. Then whenever you are calling with the particular method O.display and O2.display, it will go to the particular method, it will take the data, it will print the value, then it will display the particular output. Means it is also a constructor overloading concept, how we can implement it for simple class called it as C. So this covers completely what exactly constructor, what is destructor, and its example, and complete working principle of constructor and destructor, where we are going to be using, and what's an application usage, technical examples, practically how that constructor destructor, its syntax, and types of constructors, right? Thank you for watching the video of the concept and constructor and destructor in C++. Just go to the YouTube channel link and verify it. If you have any doubts, you just revert back. And thank you for your session listening, and thank you again. And any feedback and suggestions and comments, you just add it directly in a